Well, sources say White House officials and Republican negotiators are inching closer to an agreement to raise the debt ceiling. If that doesn't happen come Thursday, the U.S. Treasury Secretary says it's highly likely that there won't be enough money to pay all the government bills. On the international front, China and Japan are quite concerned. They own a combined $2 trillion of U.S. debt. So now they're watching what happens very closely in Washington. I want to go to D.C. now with CNN's Arlette Saenz, who joins us live. Arlette, the U.S. has never defaulted. This, of course, would be a first time if it happened. And there is a lot to achieve in the next 5 or 6 days. Where do both sides see eye to eye right now? Where have we seen some progress in coming to a deal?
Well, and negotiators are really racing against the clock as they're trying to finalize some type of agreement to avert a default. And really, these next 24 to 48 hours are a critical time period, especially when you take a look at the legislative calendar and how long it would take to move something through Capitol Hill. Now, there have been some signs that these talks have been progressing and that they are moving closer to an agreement. Sources say that some of the contours that they are discussing is raising the debt ceiling for 2 years and pairing that with spending caps that would also continue for that same length of time. Now, these spending caps would not apply to defense or veterans programs, but sources still caution that there is still work to do in determining what those spending levels will look like. There are also other sticking points, one of the major ones being the work requirements that Republicans want to see for some social safety net programs. So these are all things that negotiators are talking about in these final days of negotiations. Now, the president has said that he does think that they can get to an agreement, but it really remains unclear when they will be able to do so. Now, there have been some Democrats, progressives, who have been pushing the president to use the 14th Amendment to raise the debt ceiling on his own. But the White House and the president have insisted that there are no backup options here. This morning, the Deputy Treasury Secretary, Wally Adeyemo, was on CNN, and he said that that 14th Amendment is not an option. So what the White House has been urging is that Congress needs to act in this moment. One of the other issues that they are facing is that they've started to hear a lot of consternation from both Republicans and Democrats who are frustrated with what they are learning about this deal, each side feeling that their parties have given too much. So that would be a key challenge in trying to ensure that they have enough votes to get this passed up on Capitol Hill. So all eyes will be on today and this weekend to see if they can finalize some type of agreement as that potential date of running out of money to pay for the bills approaches in early June.
Yeah, rapidly approaching. And Arlette, if the U.S. doesn't reach an agreement by June 1st, or if there's a last minute deal, what happens? What are the risks, like a credit rating downgrade, for example?
Well, for weeks, people have been warning about what the economic impacts of a potential default would be. And earlier in the week, you got that warning from Fitch, which said that they've put the U.S. credit rating on a negative watch with the potential of having it downgraded. This happened back in 2011 where the United States perfect credit rating was downgraded, and it really provoked a lot of panic, especially in the markets. You saw the stock market tank. So that is something that people will be watching very closely in the coming days. You know, the White House has also warned that waiting until the final minute could also cost up to 200,000 jobs. So there is a lot on the line for people, especially when people who are relying on benefits from Social Security and veterans benefits, which could all be in jeopardy if the U.S. were to default.
Yeah, a lot of concerns. As you say, the clock is ticking, 5 or 6 days to go. Good to have you with us, Arlette Saenz. Thank you. Well, after a glitchy online campaign launch, the newest candidate in the Republican race for the White House has reportedly raked in more than $8 million in just the first 24 hours of his campaign. And now Ron DeSantis is sharpening his attacks on the Republican frontrunner. CNN's Steve Contorno explains.
A day after technical glitches marred the campaign launch of Governor Ron DeSantis' presidential ambitions, he returned to the more friendly confines of conservative media. In more than a dozen interviews, DeSantis directly went after President Trump in a way he really has never done so before. In those interviews, he presented a stark contrast between himself and the way he has governed in Florida and Trump's 4 years in office. He suggested that Trump was ineffective, that he ran the deficit up, that he risked the lives and livelihoods of people with his COVID policies. And he said that if he were elected president, he would be a far more ruthless user of government power in the White House. DeSantis also in one of those appearances challenged Donald Trump to actually show up to the presidential debates. This is what he said.
Do you plan on participating in all the debates? And would you have a word of counsel for any candidates that were maybe equivocating on whether or not to participate in all the debates?
I think we should debate. I think the people want to hear it. You know, I grew up blue collar, working minimum wage jobs, and learned nobody's entitled to anything in this world, Trey. You've got to earn it. And I think all of us have to go out and earn it. That's exactly what I intend to do. And I think the debates are a big part of the process.
Next week, Governor DeSantis will return to the campaign trail with stops in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina.